This video is based on Lingshan Hermit's work on the difference between Eastern and Western cultures. All rights reserved. Any infringement will be pursued. Max Weber said, Confucian culture is not a practical study, but only a set of value systems for maintaining social order. Schools did not teach mathematics, natural science or geography, and the people they cultivated had no logical creativity. As you know, this is not the first time I have brought out Max Weber to criticize, and certainly it won't be the last. As far as I know, Weber's view is no longer solely his own today, and this understanding has already become the consensus of many in academia. As for the general public, although they know almost nothing about Confucianism, this does not prevent them from holding similar views. In my last discussion about Max Weber, I talked about what constitutes useful knowledge. This time I intend to talk about the origins, differences and foundations of Chinese and Western cultures. For a long time, I have always wanted to write an article on the differences between Chinese and Western cultures. To be blunt, in my range of reading over the years, I have hardly seen anyone who could really articulate Chinese culture clearly. In recent years, I have been observing the culture left behind by the Eastern sages and observing its effects on the Chinese people, observing its application in East Asian life. I have also been observing Western society and Western culture. This kind of observation has sometimes provoked in me a strong sadness, especially when I see many Orientals who completely misunderstand and strongly reject Eastern culture. This also gives me a stronger motivation to write this article. From the perspective of modern utilitarianism, traditional Chinese culture seems to be completely useless, or more precisely, useless. According to modern definitions of usefulness, Eastern traditional culture has hardly invented anything that you would consider useful. It has no irons, no Uber software, no instant coffee or mechanical keyboards. Chinese society has also not nurtured a Faraday or a Rutherford. From an empiricist point of view, you do not see anyone becoming a Buddha or gaining immortality, nor do you see the gentleman advocated by Confucianism. On the contrary, you do tend to see many hypocrites. Therefore, many people come to the preposterous conclusion that traditional culture is completely fraudulent. For most ordinary people, these traditional cultures are of almost no help at all to their daily lives. Most people believe that they are just a bunch of big, empty and useless words. The states described in traditional culture are like living in the clouds, completely disconnected from people's real lives. They require people to do things that are simply impossible. They are not like the Talmud, which points out every aspect of life, even telling you what time you should get up, what kind of wife you should marry, and whose money you should earn. When you encounter specific problems, you go to a psychologist or lawyer, not to Confucius or Mencius, because for the masses, their words are too vague and of no practical help in real life, because they cannot be applied or connected concretely with one's own life. Most humans living in 2023 do not feel that the teachings of Confucianism, or Buddhism and Taoism, are of any help to their lives. Compared with the words of Confucius, they feel that capsule coffee machines and KFC discount coupons are somewhat more useful. It is not surprising that this is the result, and the reason this result occurs is because these teachings were not written for the general public. They were not written for housewives or undergraduate business students. Whether it is the Daodajing or the Analects, they were written for people who truly want to explore the truth. So if you try to use them to solve your specific life problems, you will probably only end up disappointed. For most ordinary people, it is very difficult to directly apply these teachings to solve your problems, because they are too profound. Whether it is the Nanhua Jing or the Great Learning, the words recorded in them all come from enlightened beings of varying degrees. They are the experiences and insights of the enlightened. For ordinary people, it is impossible to correctly understand these words, let alone apply them. These words need to be decoded by people with corresponding spiritual accomplishments and wisdom, who can then refer to your specific situation and tell you what to do. Only by going through this process can you possibly apply them to your own life and benefit from them, and only then can you slowly understand what these books are actually talking about. Unfortunately, this process has not been systematically established in East Asian societies. Only a very small number of fortunate individuals have the opportunity to glimpse the essence of Chinese culture in this way. Because of the lack of this system, when the masses are faced with the teachings of the sages, they can only attempt to approach the thoughts of the sages through their own way of thinking. It's like guessing riddles. In traditional Chinese society, you are required to repeatedly read the works of the sages until you know them by heart. Those teachers probably assumed that just by becoming thoroughly familiar with Confucius' books, people could slowly understand his state of mind. But obviously, this is just wishful thinking by amateurs. In the systems of Buddhism, Taoism and Confucianism, even Confucius' relatively basic words cannot be understood without the corresponding cultivation state, especially when nothing but a goal is provided. So hypocrisy became the only choice for most people. In the eyes of modern intellectuals, traditional culture is completely deceptive and useless. Because traditional culture did not invent computers or Thompson submachine guns. It just puts forward a whole set of moral norms that they see as completely useless. In their opinion, these moral norms also did not work. They did not make everyone better, but rather turned everyone into hypocrites, teaching everyone to lie and pretend. So from their point of view, Confucian teachings are simply fraudulent things. A set of shackles that restrict human nature and freedom. Completely contrary to human nature. If I were not a spiritual cultivator, if I did not know the relationship between the whole Confucian system and spiritual cultivation, if I had received systematic modern academic education, if I could not break free from the shackles of modern civilization, I would probably agree with their thinking and also believe that traditional culture is completely worthless. Judging from the practical results of Confucianism in Eastern societies, it is not suitable for large-scale popularization. I have always believed that for ordinary people, it is better not to provide them with incomplete, hierarchical teachings, but to let them construct their secular lives perfectly. One day, when they find that secular life cannot provide what they want, when they become weary of secular life, it will not be too late to start spiritual exploration. I think this would be better, rather than forcing teachings onto everyone's lives as Confucianism did by means of power, telling everyone how they should be, what kind of people they should be, what they should do, but not providing the corresponding logical systems and concrete steps to become such a person. This makes their requirement seem extremely unreasonable, but because of the intervention of power, the public has no choice but to accept it. However, they do not understand the logic and benefits of doing so. They are simply required to do so, but cannot achieve it, so they can only pretend to be such people, resulting in widespread hypocrisy. Confucian scholars after Confucius did not realize that what Confucius demonstrated was the result of his own cultivation. Those states are by no means accessible to ordinary people simply by reading the Analects repeatedly. You cannot require a person to read Confucius teachings and immediately achieve Confucius' level of understanding attained after decades of cultivation, especially when nothing but a goal is provided. I seem to be criticizing Confucianism for not providing comprehensive services for its theories, but I am actually very clear that it would be completely impossible to provide specific and comprehensive education for everyone. No one could possibly do that. Few people know how much wisdom it takes to teach the Dharma in a way that makes it comprehensible to everyone. And few people know what kind of enlightenment and skill a person must possess in order to teach according to the disposition of the student. Even in Buddhism, such people are extremely rare. Therefore, it is too much to ask those Confucian scholars who simply read books to do these things. In China's long history, there has always been a lack of people who could link traditional culture with real-life situations. This requires a high degree of enlightenment and skillfulness. Therefore, even if it was Confucianism's wish, it would have been completely impossible for them to achieve. Even in Buddhism, people of such talent are extremely scarce, so most practitioners neither receive suitable teachings for themselves, nor sufficient explanation. Most of the time, they can only arbitrarily understand the teacher's words based on their own state of mind. This gives demons ample room to distort everything they hear. We just said that Chinese sages had no interest in building a sound secular society. Chinese traditional culture does not aim to establish a perfect secular society. Those systems dedicated to building a perfect secular society live under one assumption: that we only have this one life, that the more we gain, the happier we become, that if we establish a perfect secular society, we will be happy, that if supervision is in place, crime will know difficulties and retreat, that if we improve all our laws, our suffering will decrease or disappear, that if we can manufacture a drug that can treat all diseases, we will no longer suffer from illness. Judging from the huge changes that have taken place in American society in just the past few years, their assumptions are collapsing one by one. These assumptions made by Westerners seem extremely naive from the perspective of Chinese sages. Chinese sages do not agree with their way of thinking, so they did not try to create artificial intelligence, did not try to contact aliens, did not strive to develop AIDS medications, and did not design systems to contain human greed either. They just taught us ways to improve ourselves, starting by observing the problems inherent within us, slowly understanding the root causes of suffering, understanding the composition of suffering, understanding which behaviors and speech led to suffering, which notions led to suffering, and then slowly correcting past notions and slowly arriving at the state of liberation. A true spiritual practitioner, most of his or her cultivation occurs internally, which means that true cultivation involves storms occurring internally. Externally, it is almost impossible for outsiders to discern the internal changes happening within a practitioner. What you would probably see is that the person doesn't seem to do anything, just sitting there all day, or chanting some useless mantras. Therefore, for the general public, it is almost an impossible task to verify the results of their cultivation. The public does not know what they have attained, what experiences they have had, what feelings they have experienced. Those ascetics by the Ganges River in India and those meditating in the Himalayan mountains seem to modern civilization's slaves to be doing completely meaningless things. They might even be considered cunning lazybones. But from the perspective of those practitioners, the elites who show up in office buildings every day in neatly dressed suits live meaningless lives. They are about to die, yet still working hard to accumulate things that will soon no longer belong to them. Just like Indian culture, Chinese culture also largely transcends the sphere of comprehension of modern civilization. From the perspective of the general public, they can hardly see any useful results. Most people cannot see the achievements of those who truly practice Eastern traditional culture. After all, their accomplishments are not as self-evident as those of Elon Musk. Even if you sit face to face with an enlightened being, you cannot experience their state. You have no way of knowing what they have realized. You might even feel that they look no different from your average middle-aged neighbor. Therefore, for the masses, traditional cultural practitioners are far less attractive than Musk. After all, the latter's achievements are embodied in piles of dollars. And among those who claim to be practitioners, there may also be a large number of imposters mixed in. Do not expect the masses to be able to distinguish between imposters and true practitioners. They will simply lump them together. For the general public, it is almost impossible to verify the efficacy of traditional culture. On the one hand, few people can persist for long periods of time doing something when they cannot see results. On the other hand, most people also fail to receive proper guidance. For example, there is a saying in Chinese traditional culture that relinquishing is obtaining. Chinese traditional culture also says that taking losses is good fortune. But most ordinary people neither know the correct things to relinquish nor how to relinquish them, let alone having enough patience to keep doing it. For the masses, lacking proper guidance and a complete and thorough understanding of the theory. What they do is like throwing fish food into a river and expecting the fish to spontaneously leap in swarms to their feet. Therefore, they can hardly see results. All they see is losses as losses, relinquishing as relinquishing, no gains whatsoever. When they see results like these, they will naturally feel that it was all just a scam. Compared with the efficient, fast-acting and verifiable systems established by the West in secular society, they will naturally feel that this represents a superior civilization. Someone once asked me, why does Chinese traditional culture seem to go against people's normal desires in almost every way? In their attitudes toward greed, hatred and ignorance, they unanimously display harsh attitudes. Many modern people see this as a major defect of traditional culture. Western culture, on the other hand, is very tolerant about this, so people feel that kind of culture is more in line with human nature. The reason why Western culture is tolerant in this regard is that Western culture is based on the idea that you are an individual, so you will have various desires and demands that a human being should have, and satisfying these desires is not seen as a sin in modern Western culture. Therefore, going on sea voyages to seek treasures and then leisurely enjoying the yields for a lifetime is a topic that Hollywood never tires of. Hollywood movies have influenced generations of people. Today, the world generally believes that the more you get, the happier you become. They are also willing to take risks in order to gain more. But Eastern traditional culture completely disagrees with this way of thinking. They do not believe that the more you get, the happier you become. They believe that if people do not restrain their desires and are led around by their desires, it will ultimately lead to disaster. Over the years, I have seen many people who do not know how to restrain their desires bring tremendous disasters upon themselves and others. In a sense, they are victims of Hollywood movies. Eastern sages believe that desire is endless. If you open this breach, you will be unable to stop it. The more you want, the more you will be out of control until you eventually destroy yourself. In today's world where Western culture has captivated almost everyone, you can see that the wealth some liver streamers accumulate in a single day is equal to what others earn in decades. They believe they are the lucky ones of the times. From my perspective, I don't think it's a good thing to exhaust all of one's blessings in a day. Western culture is based on the existence of a real individual self, while Eastern traditional culture, as we have just said, it is a spiritual cultivation culture. This kind of culture is based on the fact that there is no real existence of a self. It is based on satisfying one's desires does not lead to happiness. Desire only gives rise to more desire, thereby inducing more sin and chaos. It is based on conventional and ultimate truth. Eastern traditional culture is based on these things. So much of the time it looks completely contrary to human nature. Another reason why it appears contrary to human nature is that most executors lack skillfulness. Unwise people will execute everything in a very rigid manner. Confucianism tries to compress our desires to a certain range in preparation for higher levels of cultivation afterwards. However, since most people living in such a society completely don't understand this system and the purpose of doing so, they just live in such a society very grudgingly, required to comply with various standards. Like when you require a bunch of ordinary people to do things contrary to their temperament but do not tell them the reasons and benefits of doing so, it is not hard to imagine what would eventually happen. This is the cause of many tragedies. I have always believed that things like the Indian caste system and Confucianism are very good things, if used correctly. Unfortunately, they have not been correctly utilized. They were crudely and excessively applied to the whole of society by people lacking wisdom, causing considerable problems. However, from a technical level, it would also have been very difficult for them to be used correctly, both because of the lack of people capable of using these things properly, and also because demons spare no effort trying to sabotage their implementation. Just like how some religions started out with the intention of severing the conditions that led to desire by covering women's faces, but this method has similarly been condemned because it was applied very foolishly. Demons will not miss any opportunity for sabotage. When the masses do not know the meaning of the Confucian or Indian caste demands placed on them but are still required to implement them, they will only carry them out mechanically. Add to that the demons' tireless efforts to distort any positive endeavor. Various problems will naturally arise over time and surface. When these problems emerge, people will blame them on that culture and it will inevitably have to face accusations from all sides. The tragedy is that people who live in such societies for a long time can only see the downsides while being completely oblivious to the benefits. So they naturally believe that this is a completely useless culture that suppresses human nature and has caused countless tragedies. If our existence were real, if we would be happier the more we possessed, if we could truly achieve happiness by defeating others, then the whole set of Western logic, values, lifestyles and paths to happiness designed accordingly would be correct. But unfortunately, this is not the case. You only need to understand a little bit of quantum mechanics to know that the way we exist is not as we imagine. However, given that quantum mechanics only emerged in the early 20th century, the West's understanding of ultimate truth has only just begun. So you cannot expect them to immediately produce new ideas for life practices. After all, their value systems and lifestyles arising from the presumption of a real, independently existing self and the independent existence of all phenomena had already lasted over 1,000 years. So Eastern culture is a spiritual cultivation culture system based on no self. Because it is too profound, much of its ideology is not suitable for public dissemination. Only an extremely small portion is suitable for the masses. That said, it remains an indispensable part of our lives. I have seen too many tragedies that were caused precisely because the protagonists lacked this kind of culture. Perhaps what we should explore is how to apply these cultures in the most harmless way. Any culture or teaching method, in the hands of people who do not know how to use them properly, will become a disaster. Chinese traditional culture has many different levels and angles. These different levels and angles are methods aimed at different levels of people. For wise and skillful people, these methods can be extremely flexible and humane. They are not absolutely unadjustable. But for people lacking wisdom and skill, it is very easy for them to become a whole set of rigid rules and weapons that harm everyone. This is how many tragedies arise. In the hands of a wise person, it can be used to benefit living beings and guide them to realize ultimate truth. But in the hands of an unwise person, it will only be a weapon to harm others. Confucianism, Taoism and Buddhism. Some only provided concepts. Some provided complete concepts and methods. These concepts and methods have many different levels and angles. Unfortunately, nowadays these methods of different levels have been jumbled up by people who do not understand them and chaotically interpreted by the masses, which has also caused many problems. Therefore, the tools themselves are not the issue. It is a group of unknowing people operating them haphazardly that has caused problems. Chinese traditional sages had no intention to establish a sound secular society. They did not want to build vacuum tube trains or migrate to Mars. Similarly, they also lacked interest in making perfect sushi or medical security systems. Compared to these things, they prefer to observe their own minds. Compared with the conquering and defeating of others in Western culture, they prefer to conquer themselves and do battle with their own greed, hatred, ignorance, arrogance and doubt. They achieve ultimate happiness in this way. But from an amateur's point of view, it may look like they have done nothing, just sitting there and expecting you to serve them meals. Even after attaining accomplishment, they do not produce piles of dollars, so they appear to be quite useless.